picture a sleepy English village, Chipping Cleghorn, where a chilling newspaper ad announces a murder at Little Paddocks. When a stranger dies in a staged robbery and a dear friend is poisoned, the quiet facade of Letitia Blacklock's home unravels. Enter Miss Marple, whose keen eyes pierce a web of lies, revealing a sister's stolen identity, a fortune's deadly lure, and a killer hiding in plain sight. In 10 gripping chapters, secrets fall, masks shatter, and justice prevails. Ready for a mystery where no one is who they seem? Chapter 1. The Strange Notice. The morning of October 29th dawned crisp and grey over Chipping Cleghorn, a village so unassuming that its daily rhythms rarely stirred beyond the clink of milk bottles and the rustle of hedgerows. At breakfast tables across its tidy cottages, the North Benham Gazette lay open, its pages offering the usual fare: jumble sales, lost cats, and the price of winter cabbage. But today, nestled among the classifieds, a peculiar advertisement caught every eye. In stark black print, it read, "A murder is announced and will take place on Friday, October 29th at Little Paddocks at 6:30 p.m. Friends accepted, please." Mrs. Swettenham, pouring tea in her rose-papered parlour, gasped and clutched her pearls. "Edmund, have you seen this? A murder at Letitia Blacklock's. What can it mean?" Her son, a lanky writer with a penchant for cynicism, glanced over his spectacles. "A parlour game, mother. Some tasteless jest." Across the lane, Colonel Easterbrook, retired and perpetually polishing his medals, harumphed to his younger wife, Laura. "Damned odd way to invite people. Blacklock's no. Fool, though. Must be a mistake." Laura, painting her nails a defiant scarlet, only shrugged. At Dyer's Hall, Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd, sturdy and sensible in their tweeds, debated over porridge. "Sounds like nonsense," Hinchcliffe barked, "but I'll go. Never know with Letty Blacklock." In Meddenham Wells, 10 miles away, Miss Jane Marple sat in the sunny breakfast room of her nephew's wife, Dolly. The Gazette, borrowed from the vicarage, lay beside her toast. Her mild blue eyes, framed by delicate wrinkles, lingered on the advertisement. Her knitting needles, ever present, stilled in her lap. "Most irregular," she murmured. Dolly, bustling in with fresh marmalade, peered over her shoulder. "What's that, Aunt Jane? A murder announced? How thrilling!" Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Thrilling is not the word, my dear. Provocative, perhaps, and dangerous." She folded the paper precisely, her mind already turning over the implications of such a public declaration. At Little Paddocks, a handsome Georgian house with ivy-clad walls, Letitia Blacklock stood in her drawing-room, the offending Gazette in hand. A woman of 60, her dark hair streaked with grey. She carried herself with the quiet authority of one accustomed to managing crises. Her hazel eyes, sharp behind spectacles, scanned the room where her household gathered, their faces a mix of amusement and unease. Dora Bunner, her old school friend, fluttered like a startled hen, her faded blue dress as crumpled as her nerves. "Oh, Letty, it's dreadful! Who could have done this? It's not funny!" Letitia's smile was thin. "A prank bunny. Someone with too much time. We'll ignore it." Patrick Simmons, sprawled in an armchair, grinned roguishly. A former naval officer, his charm was as polished as his shoes. "Come now, Aunt Letty, it's a lark. Bet it's old Hinchcliffe stirring the pot." His sister Julia, perched on the window seat, rolled her eyes. Slender and cool, with a medical student's precision, she flicked ash from her cigarette. "Don't be absurd, Pat. It's vulgar, whoever did it." Philippa Hames, the quiet lodger, looked up from her sewing. A war widow with a son to support, her grey eyes held a flicker of worry. "Will people really come, Miss Blacklock?" Letitia's tone was brisk. "If they do, we'll offer sherry and laugh it off. Nothing more." In the kitchen, Mitzi, the tempestuous Hungarian cook, slammed pots with theatrical fury. "This murder talk! It is bad, bad. I leave this mad country." Letitia, entering to check the day's menu, soothed her with practised calm. "Nonsense, Mitzi. It's a silly joke. You'll stay." But as she returned to the hall, her fingers tightened briefly on the doorframe, betraying a moment's disquiet. By late afternoon, the village buzzed. At the Bluebird Cafe, Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, speculated wildly to her friend Miss Lucas. "Perhaps it's a mystery play, like in London." Miss Lucas, sour as her lemon tea, snorted. "Letitia, Blacklock's no actress. Mark my words, there's trouble brewing." The postmistress, privy to every telegram, whispered to the baker that Letitia had received a large sum from a financier named Girdler. "Inheritance, they say. Makes you wonder." As dusk fell, Little Paddocks braced for visitors. Letitia, in a smart black dress, arranged decanters and glasses, her movements deliberate. Patrick lit the fire, joking about staging a corpse for effect. Julia, in emerald silk, lounged with a novel, ignoring Dora's anxious pacing. Philippa slipped out to check the garden gate, her face pale. At 6:25 the doorbell rang. Colonel and Mrs. Easterbrook arrived, he stiff, she giggling. Miss Hinchcliffe strode in, Murgatroyd trailing. Mrs. Swettenham, with Edmund in tow, chattered nervously. The room filled with forced cheer, glasses clinking, voices overlapping. At precisely 6:30, the lights snapped out. A collective gasp rose, a torch beam cut the dark, and a harsh voice, foreign, male, barked, "Hands up! This is a hold-up!" 2 shots cracked, sharp and deafening. A woman screamed. The torch dropped, and a heavy thud hit the floor. When Patrick fumbled the lights back on, a man lay sprawled in the hall, blood pooling beneath him. His face, young and slack, was framed by a black scarf. A revolver lay inches from his hand. Letitia, clutching her ear where a thin trickle of blood ran, stared down. "Good heavens," she said faintly. Dora collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Patrick swore softly. Julia's cigarette trembled. Philippa, frozen, whispered, "He's dead." The room erupted in chaos, voices shrill, questions unanswered. Outside the wind howled, as if Chipping Cleghorn itself recoiled from the night's grim jest. Chapter 2. Death in the Hall. The air in Little Paddocks was thick with shock and the acrid tang of gunpowder. The body of the young man lay sprawled across the polished oak floor, his black scarf askew, revealing a pale, boyish face frozen in death. A revolver glinted beside his outstretched hand, and a torch, its beam now extinguished, rolled against the baseboard. Letitia Blacklock stood rigid, one hand pressed to her ear where a thin line of blood had dried, her spectacles glinting. In the restored light, the gathered guests, Colonel Easterbrook, his wife Laura, Miss Hinchcliffe, Miss Murgatroyd, Mrs. Swettenham, and her son Edmund clustered in the drawing-room doorway, their voices a jumble of alarm and disbelief. Patrick Simmons, quickest to recover, knelt beside the body, his naval training evident in his steady hands. "He's gone," he said grimly, checking for a pulse. Julia, her emerald dress stark against her pallor, lit a fresh cigarette with trembling fingers. "Who the devil was he?" she muttered. Dora Bunner, slumped in an armchair, wailed, "Oh, Letty, it's too awful! He tried to kill you!" Philippa, Hames pale as moonlight, hovered near the stairs, her eyes wide with unspoken dread. Mitzi, bursting from the kitchen, shrieked, "Murderers! All of you, murderers!" until Letitia's sharp command silenced her. Colonel Easterbrook, his military bearing reasserted, cleared his throat. Someone fetch the police and a doctor. Edmund Swettenham, ever the observer, slipped out to the hall telephone, his writer's mind already framing the scene for some future manuscript. Within minutes, the local constable arrived, followed by Inspector Dermot Craddock, a lean man, in his 30s with a deceptively mild manner and eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed the chaos with calm authority, directing the constable to guard the body while he herded the shaken party into the dining room. Craddock's questions were precise, his notebook filling rapidly. The dead man, identified by Letitia as Rudy Schertz, was a clerk from the Royal Spa Hotel in Meddenham Wells, where she had stayed 2 years prior. "A polite young man," she said, her voice steady despite the bandage now covering her ear. "I can't imagine why he'd do this." Schertz had entered, Craddock learned, shouting about a hold-up, his torch blinding the room. 2 shots had grazed Letitia's ear, and a third, inexplicably, had pierced Scherz's own chest. The revolver, still warm, bore his fingerprints alone. "Suicide?" Colonel Easterbrook ventured, stroking his moustache. Craddock's brow lifted. "Possible, sir, but unlikely. The angle's wrong, and he'd no reason to shoot himself mid-robbery." Laura Easterbrook, fanning herself, suggested an accident. Perhaps he tripped, poor boy. Miss Hinchcliffe snorted. "Tripped into his own bullet. Rubbish." Craddock noted their theories, but pressed on, questioning each guest's position during the blackout. All claimed to be in the drawing-room, though accounts blurred in the dark. Patrick admitted to fumbling for the light switch, Julia to standing by, the window and Philippa to being near the door. Mitzi, trembling in the kitchen, swore she saw nothing but heard the shots. In Meddenham Wells, Miss Jane Marple, alerted by a breathless call from the vicar's wife, sat in Dolly's cosy parlour, her knitting untouched. "Rudy Schertz, you say?" she mused, her memories sifting through past encounters at the Royal Spa. "A charming boy, but weak, easily led." Dolly, eager for drama, leaned forward. "Do you think it was a real robbery, Aunt Jane?" Miss Marple's eyes, sharp as her, needles narrowed. "No, my dear. A robbery would be simpler. This was staged. The question is, by whom?" She recalled Letitia Blacklock's composed face from a chance meeting at the hotel, and a faint unease stirred. Something about the woman's calm, she thought, felt too deliberate. Back at Little Paddocks, Craddock examined the scene. The fuse box, tucked in a pantry, showed signs of tampering, wires loosened, easily restored. Someone planned the blackout. he told his sergeant, a stolid man named Fletcher. The bullets, recovered from the wall and Schertz's body, matched the revolver, but Craddock puzzled over the sequence. Why shoot at Letitia, only to die himself? He questioned her alone in the study, noting her poise. "You're remarkably calm, Miss Blacklock," he said. She smiled faintly. "One learns to manage, Inspector. War teaches that." Yet her fingers, smoothing her skirt, betrayed a fleeting tremor. Dora Bunner, interviewed next, was a tangle of nerves. "Letty's in danger, I know it," she blurted, her hands twisting a damp handkerchief. "She's to inherit from Randall Godler, you see. Pots of money when his widow dies." Craddock's pen paused. "And who knows of this inheritance?" Dora flushed. "Oh, everyone here, I suppose. Letty's so open." Her voice faltered, as if regretting the admission. Craddock filed it away, his mind turning to motives. An inheritance, he knew, could turn friends to foes. As dawn broke, Chipping Cleghorn hummed with rumour. The milkman, delivering to the Bluebird. Cafe swore Scherz was a foreign spy. The postmistress hinted at a jilted lover. Craddock, sifting truth from gossip, sent Fletcher to the Royal Spa to dig into Scherz's past. Meanwhile, Miss Marple, accepting an invitation to tea at the vicarage, listened to Mrs. Harmon's breathless account. "They say Letitia was nearly killed," the vicar's wife exclaimed. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts elsewhere. "Nearly," she said softly, "but nearly is not quite the same, is it?" Her needles resumed their rhythm, clicking like the pieces of a puzzle slowly locking into place. Chapter 3. Faces at Little Paddocks. The morning after Rudy Scherz's death, Little Paddocks stood under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, its ivy-clad walls glistening with dew. Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath, the echoes of gunfire and panic lingering in its polished corridors. The drawing-room, where the fatal drama had unfolded, was now meticulously tidy, its chintz curtains drawn back to admit a pale, unforgiving light. Yet the air carried a weight, as if the very furniture, sturdy armchairs, a rosewood table, a mantel clock ticking with relentless precision, knew secrets it could not speak. Miss Jane Marple arrived at 11, her black handbag clutched firmly, her sensible hat slightly askew from the brisk walk from the vicarage. She had been invited by Letitia Blacklock, ostensibly for coffee, but Miss Marple suspected the invitation stemmed from curiosity, or perhaps a need to gauge an outsider's perspective. Her nephew's wife, Dolly, had chattered all breakfast, if about the ghastly business, and Miss Marple, with her knack for listening, had gleaned enough village gossip to know that Chipping Cleghorn was alight with theories. She paused at the garden gate, noting the neatly trimmed roses and a single footprint, half erased, in the damp earth near the path. "Careless," she murmured, her mild blue eyes sharpening. Letitia Blacklock greeted her at the door, her dark hair swept back, her spectacles glinting with a welcoming smile that did not quite reach her hazel eyes. She wore a tweed skirt and a cream blouse, practical yet elegant, and her voice was warm but measured. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come. We're all rather shaken, as you can imagine." She led the way to the drawing-room, where a silver coffee pot steamed on a tray, its aroma mingling with the faint scent of beeswax polish. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet, and observed the room's occupants with the quiet intensity of one accustomed to seeing beneath surfaces. Dora Bunner, Letitia's old school friend, hovered near the coffee tray, her hands fluttering like startled birds. Her faded blue dress hung loosely on her thin frame, and her eyes, red-rimmed from crying or sleeplessness, darted nervously. "Oh, Miss Marple, isn't it dreadful?" she burst out, spilling sugar, cubes onto the cloth. "Poor Letty, nearly killed. And that awful man, why did he do it?" Letitia's hand, pouring coffee, steadied the pot with a practised calm. "Bunny, do sit down. You'll exhaust yourself." Her tone was gentle but firm, and Dora subsided into a chair, clutching her cup like a lifeline. Patrick Simmons lounged by the fireplace, one elbow propped on the mantel, his dark hair rakishly tousled. His naval officer's charm was undimmed by the previous night's horror, though his grin held a hint of strain. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice light. "Come to solve our little mystery. I say it's a case of mistaken identity. Shers thought Aunt Letty was a diamond smuggler." He winked, but his eyes flicked to Letitia, gauging her reaction. Miss Marple smiled faintly, noting the tension in his posture, the way his fingers tapped against the mantel clock. Julia Simmons, seated on a window seat, barely looked up from her medical journal. Her auburn hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her green eyes, cool and assessing, held a trace of impatience. She wore a tailored grey dress, practical for her studies, and her cigarette sent lazy curls of smoke toward the ceiling. "Don't be tiresome, Pat," she said, her voice crisp. "The man was a fool, and now he's dead. Let's not make a melodrama of it." Her detachment, Miss Marple thought, was too studied, as if she were guarding something. Disdain, perhaps, or fear. Philippa Hames, the lodger, sat quietly near the door, her hands folded in her lap. Her blonde hair was neatly pinned, and her grey eyes, shadowed with fatigue, avoided meeting anyone's gaze. She wore a simple navy frock, its hem slightly frayed, a testament to her frugal life as a war widow. "I hope you're not too upset, Miss Marple," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the room's chatter. "It's all so unexpected." Miss Marple's nod was kind, but her mind noted Philippa's pallor, the way her fingers twisted a handkerchief, betraying a deeper unease. The final member of the household, Mitzi, the Hungarian cook, did not appear until Letitia rang for more hot water. She burst into the room, her dark curls wild, her apron askew, and her eyes blazing with indignation. "I tell you, I know nothing," she declared, though no one had asked. "I hear shots. I hide in pantry. This house, it is cursed." Letitia's smile was patient. "Mitzi, please, just the water." Mitzi flounced out, muttering in her native tongue, and Miss Marple's lips twitched. Theatrics, she knew, could mask truth as easily as they revealed it. As coffee was served, Miss Marple let the conversation flow, her questions gentle but probing. "Such a charming house," she said, her eyes roaming the room. "You've lived here long, Miss Blacklock." Letitia nodded, setting down her cup. 5 years since the war ended. It was my aunt's, you see, and I inherited it." Her voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting pause, as if the words had been rehearsed. Dora, stirring her, coffee chimed in. "Oh, Letty's made it so lovely. We used to visit her aunt, didn't we, Letty? Such happy times. Her nostalgia faltered, and she glanced at Letitia, as if seeking approval. Miss Marple turned to Patrick, her tone mild. "And you, Mr. Simmons? Your cousins, I understand?" Patrick's grin widened. "Distant ones, Miss Marple. Julia and I are wards of sorts. Aunt Letty took us in after the war. Couldn't leave us to starve, could she?" His flippancy grated on Julia, who snapped, "Don't be vulgar, Pat. We're here because it's convenient, that's all." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. Convenience, she thought, was a word that covered many sins. Philippa, prompted by a kindly question, spoke of her work at a nearby nursery. "It's hard graft, but I manage, for my boy, you know." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered to Letitia, as if seeking permission to say more. Miss Marple noted the dynamic. Letitia, the linchpin, held this disparate group together, yet each seemed to orbit her with a mix of dependence and wariness. Even Mitzi, returning with a fresh pot, shot Letitia a glance that was half resentful, half fearful. The conversation turned inevitably to the previous night. Dora, her voice trembling, recounted the blackout, the torch, the shots. "I thought we'd all be killed," she said, her cup rattling in its saucer. Patrick chuckled. "Come now, Bunny, it was over in a flash. Poor Sher's got the worst of it." Julia, closing her journal, said coolly, "He was an idiot to play. Such a game. If it was a game." Her words hung in the air, and Miss Marple's needles, now clicking softly, paused. "A game," she said thoughtfully. "Yes, that's one way to see it. But games have rules, don't they? And players." Letitia, sensing a shift, rose to refill cups. "Miss Marple, you must think us very theatrical. I assure you, we're quite at ordinary." Her laugh was light, but Miss Marple caught the strain. In it, the way her hand lingered on the pot. Ordinary, she thought, was the last word for this household. She steered the talk to village life, drawing out snippets of their routines. Patrick, it seemed, spent his days knocking about, his naval career abandoned for vague ambitions. Julia studied medicine in Milchester, returning only on weekends. Philippa's nursery work kept her away most days, while Dora helped Letitia with household accounts, though her scatterbrained nature made her more hindrance than help. Mitzi, confined to the kitchen, complained of isolation, but stayed for the wages. As they spoke, Miss Marple's eyes wandered, cataloguing details. The room was comfortable, but not ostentatious. Its furnishings a mix of inherited pieces and modern touches. A framed photograph on the mantel showed two young women, one strikingly like Letitia, the other plainer, with a scarf hiding her throat. "Your sister?" Miss Marple asked, nodding toward it. Letitia's smile tightened. "Yes, Charlotte. She died abroad years ago. A sad loss." Dora's eyes filled, but she said nothing, and Miss Marple noted the silence, heavy with unspoken words. The doorbell rang, breaking the moment. It was Inspector Craddock, his lean frame filling the doorway, his expression polite but resolute. "Miss Blacklock, might I have a word?" Letitia excused herself, and Miss Marple, sensing her visit's natural end, rose. "I mustn't keep you," she said, her smile disarming. "Thank you for the coffee. Such a pleasure to meet you all." She shook hands, her grip gentle but her eyes keen, lingering on each face. Patrick's forced cheer, Julia's guarded stare, Philippa's quiet tension, Dora's anxious flutter. Outside, Miss Marple walked slowly down the garden path, her mind sifting impressions. The footprint by the gate was gone, smoothed over, but she remembered its size. Too large for Mitzi, too small for Patrick. She passed the village green, where Mrs. Harmon waved from the vicarage. "Any clues, Miss Marple?" "The vicar's wife called, half joking." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Only people, Mrs. Harmon, and people are always the best clues." Back at Little Paddocks, Craddock sat with Letitia in the study, his notebook open. He had spent the morning at the Royal Spa, where Scherze's colleagues described him as a dreamer, fond of quick schemes but no criminal. "He knew you, Miss Blacklock," Craddock said, watching her closely. "Any reason he'd target you?" Letitia's expression was composed. "None, Inspector. He was polite at the hotel, nothing more." Craddock pressed, mentioning the Godler inheritance, and Letitia nodded. "Yes, it's common knowledge here, but I can't see how it connects." Her voice was steady, but Craddock noted her hands clasped tightly in her lap. As he left, Craddock passed the drawing-room, where Patrick was teasing Dora about her nerves. "Buck up, Bunny, or we'll think you shot the chap." Dora's laugh was strained, and Julia, passing by, muttered, "Idiot." Philippa, clearing the coffee tray, kept her head down, but Craddock caught her glance at Letitia's retreating figure. A look not of fear, but of something deeper, like pity. He filed it away, his mind turning to the fuse box, the tampered wires, the too convenient blackout. Someone in this house, he thought, knew more than they said. Miss Marple, now at the vicarage, sipped tea with Mrs. Harmon, her knitting needles clicking. The vicar's wife was full of theories. Scherz as a jilted lover, a foreign agent, a madman. Miss Marple listened, her thoughts elsewhere. She recalled Letitia's calm, Patrick's charm, Julia's coldness, Philippa's reserve, Dora's nerves, Mitzi's outbursts. Each, she knew, played a role in this puzzle, their faces like cards in a game not yet fully dealt. "A house," she said softly, "is only as strong as its foundations. And I wonder, Mrs. Harmon, what lies beneath Little Paddocks." The rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, drumming on the vicarage roof. In Chipping Cleghorn, whispers spread, of money, of motives, of a murder announced with chilling precision. And Miss Marple, her needles moving rhythmically, felt the first threads of truth begin to weave together, delicate but unbreakable. Chapter 4. Whispers of Wealth. The rain that had threatened Chipping Cleghorn all morning arrived by noon, a steady drizzle that turned the village lanes to mud and cloaked Little Paddocks in a grey, mournful haze. Inside the house, the atmosphere was no less heavy, the shock of Rudy Scherz's death settling into a restless unease among its occupants. The drawing-room, once a stage for gunfire and chaos, now held only the soft creak of floorboards and the occasional clink of china as Letitia Blacklock moved through her daily routine with determined calm. Yet the weight of unanswered questions lingered, as palpable as the damp seeping through the window frames. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the weather, sat in the vicarage's cosy parlour, her black umbrella drying by the hearth. Her knitting Needles moved with their usual rhythm, but her mild blue eyes were far from idle, sifting through the morning's gleanings. Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, had regaled her with village gossip over breakfast. Tales of Scherz's charm at the Eduscio, royal spa, whispers of Letitia's wealth, and speculation about the strange advertisement that had drawn a crowd to a murder. Miss Marple listened, her comments spare but her mind active, piecing together fragments like a quilt whose pattern was only just emerging. At Little Paddocks, Inspector Dermot Craddock stood in the study, his lean frame silhouetted against a bookcase filled with well-worn novels and ledgers. His notebook lay open on the desk, its pages dense with notes from interviews and inquiries. He had spent the morning delving into the financial threads that seemed to weave through the case. And now he faced Letitia Blacklock, who sat composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her tweed skirt and pearl brooch bespoke understated elegance. But Craddock noted the slight tightening of her jaw as he broached the subject of Randall Goadler's will. "Miss Blacklock," he began, his tone courteous but firm, "I understand you stand to inherit a significant fortune from Mr. Goadler, contingent on the death of his widow Belle. Can you confirm this?" Letitia's hazel eyes met his without flinching. "Yes, Inspector. Randall was a friend of my father's, and I worked for him briefly in London. His will names me as beneficiary after Belle, who is quite frail now." Her voice was steady, but Craddock caught a faint hesitation, as if she were measuring each word. "And who else knows of this?" he pressed. Letitia's smile was thin. "It's hardly a secret. Dora, Miss Bunner, mentions it often, and I suppose the household is aware. Village talk, you know." Craddock nodded, his pen scratching. He had learned from Dora Bunner, in a tearful interview, that the Goadler fortune was vast. Stocks, properties, a legacy that could transform Little Paddocks from comfortable to opulent. But the will had a caveat. If Letitia predeceased Belle, the estate would pass to a distant relative, a fact Dora had let slip with nervous haste. Craddock's mind turned to motives. Wealth, he knew, could stir darker impulses than jealousy or greed. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock. Patrick Simmons entered, his usual swagger tempered by the sombre mood. "Sorry to barge in, Aunt Letty," he said, tossing a damp coat over a chair. "Constable's asking for you, Craddock. Something about the fuse box." Craddock excused himself, but not before noting Patrick's glance at Letitia, a mix of familiarity and something sharper, like defiance. As he stepped into the hall, he caught a snatch of their conversation, Patrick's voice low. "You're sure you're all right, Aunt Letty, after that scare?" Letitia's reply was inaudible, but her tone was brisk, dismissive. Outside, the constable, a ruddy-faced man named Harris, stood by the pantry, where the fuse box was tucked behind a shelf of preserves. "Found this, sir," he said, holding up a small screwdriver, its handle worn but clean. "Tucked behind the box. Not part of the household tools, far as Miss Blacklock says." Craddock examined it, his mind racing. The blackout had been no accident. Someone had loosened the wires, ensuring darkness for Scherz's entrance. But who? He pocketed the tool, instructing Harris to canvass the village for its owner, though he doubted it would yield much. Chipping Cleghorn's residents were adept at guarding their own. Meanwhile, Miss Marple, declining Mrs. Harmon's offer of a second scone, had turned her attention to a more tangible lead. The vicar, a scholarly man with a passion for local history, had invited her to browse the parish records, kept in a dusty cupboard off the vestry. "I thought you might find them amusing, Miss Marple," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Births, deaths, marriages, quite a chronicle of village life." Miss Marple's smile was polite, but her interest was keen. She had a hunch, born of long experience, that the past often held the key to the present's puzzles. The records, bound in cracked leather, smelled of mildew and time. Miss Marple, her fingers deft despite her years, paged through entries from the 1920s, when Letitia and her sister Charlotte were girls. She found their births, Letitia in 1885, Charlotte a year later, both daughters of Dr. Blacklock, a respected local physician. But of Charlotte's death, which Letitia had placed abroad, there was no mention, not in the parish or the county rolls. Miss Marple's needles, resting in her lap, stilled. "Curious," she murmured. A death abroad might escape local notice, but the absence nagged at her like a dropped stitch in a pattern. Her thoughts were interrupted by the vicar's wife, bursting in with news. "Miss Marple, you'll never guess. Mitzi, that cook at Little Paddocks, is telling everyone she heard a plot to kill Miss Blacklock." Mrs. Harmon's eyes sparkled with excitement. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind quickened. "Indeed? And what does Mitzi say?" Mrs. Harmon recounted the tale. Mitzi, fetching coal the previous evening, claimed to have overheard voices in the garden, one saying, "She mustn't suspect, not yet." The cook, prone to dramatics, had fled to the kitchen, convinced Letitia was doomed. Miss Marple, thanking Mrs. Harmon, resolved to visit Little Paddocks again. She arrived in the late afternoon, her umbrella dripping, and was ushered into the kitchen by a flustered Dora Bunner. Mitzi, kneading dough with furious energy, glared at the intrusion. "I say nothing more," she declared, flour dusting her apron. "You all think I lie." Miss Marple, her tone soothing, sat at the scrubbed table. "My dear, I only want to understand. You heard voices, you say?" Mitzi, mollified by the gentle approach, recounted her story, her accent thick with agitation. "2 voices, she insisted, 1 male, 1 female, near the garden shed. They talk of killing, of making it look like accident. I swear it." Miss Marple listened, her eyes on Mitzi's trembling hands. Exaggeration, perhaps, but fear was genuine, and fear, she knew, often pointed to truth. She thanked Mitzi, slipping her a peppermint from her bag, and sought Letitia, who was in the drawing-room, sorting correspondence. "Miss Marple, twice in one day," Letitia said, her smile polite but wary. "You're becoming a regular guest." Miss Marple's chuckle was disarming. "I hope I'm not a nuisance. I heard about Mitzi's tale and thought you should know." Letitia's expression tightened, but she waved a hand. "Mitzi's always seeing ghosts. She probably heard Patrick teasing Julia. They're forever bickering." Her explanation was plausible, yet Miss Marple noted the way Letitia's pen paused, the ink blotting slightly on the page. She steered the talk to safer ground, asking about the garden, but her eyes wandered to a small desk, where a letter, half hidden, bore a Swiss postmark. "You've travelled much, Miss Blacklock?" she asked lightly. Letitia's reply was swift. "Oh, here and there. Switzerland before the war. Lovely country." Her voice was casual, but Miss Marple sensed a wall, erected with care. As she left, Miss Marple passed Julia Simmons in the hall, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. "Off to Milchester?" Miss Marple asked, her tone neighbourly. Julia nodded, her green eyes cool. Exams next week, no rest for the wicked. Her smile was fleeting, and Miss Marple wondered what wickedness, if any, lay behind that poised exterior. Outside the rain had eased, and she paused by the garden shed, its door ajar. Inside she glimpsed a coil of wire and a pair of muddy boots, men's, size 10, she estimated, not Patrick's, whose lanky frame suggested larger feet. "Interesting," she murmured, filing it away. Craddock, meanwhile, had pursued his own leads. At the Royal Spa, Schertz's manager described him as a drifter, fond of gambling but no thief. A ledger, however, showed a curious entry. Schertz had received a cash payment days before his death from an account Craddock traced to Chipping Cleghorn's bank. The name attached was vague, a trust, not an individual, but it hinted at a local connection. Craddock's next stop was Belle Godler's home, a grand manor 30 miles away, where the ailing widow received him in a room thick with velvet and memories. Belle, frail but sharp, confirmed the will. "Letitia was like a daughter to Randall," she said, her voice a whisper. "If I die, she gets everything, unless she's gone first, of course. Then it's some cousin of Randall's, I forget who." Her eyes twinkled. "Letitia's tough, though. She'll outlive us all." Craddock, probing gently, asked about Charlotte Blacklock. Belle frowned. "Poor Charlotte. Died in Switzerland," Letitia said. "A throat condition, I think. So sad." Her words were sincere, but Craddock caught a flicker of doubt, as if the story sat uneasily. Back in Chipping Cleghorn, the village pulsed with rumour. At the Bluebird Café, Mrs. Lucas swore Scherz had been seen with a mysterious woman. The postmistress hinted at a coded letter posted to Little Paddocks. Craddock, sifting fact from fancy, felt the case tightening like a net around the house. He returned to Little Paddocks, where Dora Bunner, catching him in the hall, clutched his arm. "Inspector, you must protect Letty. Someone's after her, I feel it." Her eyes were wild, and Craddock, patting her hand, promised vigilance, though his mind was on the screwdriver, the bank account, the voices in the garden. Miss Marple, now at Dolly's cottage, sipped cocoa by the fire, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the rain's patter. Dolly, eager for intrigue, pressed her. "What do you make of it, Aunt Jane? Is Letitia in danger?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Danger, my dear, is like a shadow. It follows closely, but you must know where to look." Her thoughts turned to Letitia's calm, Patrick's charm, Julia's reserve, Philippa's silence, Dora's fears, Mitzi's outburst, and Charlotte, the absent sister, whose shadow loomed larger with each unanswered question. "A game," she said softly, "but not a simple one. And the stakes, I fear, are very high." The rain fell harder, drumming on the cottage roof, and, in Chipping Cleghorn, the whispers of wealth grew louder, entwining with secrets that refused to stay buried. Chapter 5. Poison in the Tea. The drizzle that had cloaked Chipping Cleghorn for days lifted on the morning of November the 2nd, leaving a brittle sunlight that did little to warm the village's mood. Little Paddocks, its ivy glistening with leftover. Rain stood as a silent sentinel to the events that had shaken its walls. The death of Rudy Schertz, now 4 days past, had settled into a grim fact. But the questions it raised buzzed like flies over the village green. At the vicarage, Miss Jane Marple sat by a window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her mild blue eyes fixed on a distant thought. The parish was abuzz with a fresh horror, one that had struck the previous afternoon and left Chipping Cleghorn reeling. Dora Bunner was dead. The news had reached Miss Marple via Mrs. Harmon, who had burst into the vicarage at dusk, her usual cheer replaced by a pallor that matched the fading light. "It's too awful, Miss Marple," she had gasped, sinking into a chair. "Poor Miss Bunner. Poisoned, they say, right at the Bluebird Café." Miss Marple's needles had stilled, her mind already turning over the implications. Poison, she knew, was a weapon of precision, requiring not just intent, but opportunity. And Dora, with her nervous chatter and vague loyalties, had been no random target. The details, pieced together from Mrs. Harmon's breathless account, and later confirmed by Inspector Dermot Craddock, were stark. Dora had gone to the Bluebird Café at 3 o'clock, a habit born of her fondness for their scones, and the chance to gossip with Mrs. Lucas, the proprietress. She had ordered tea and a slice of Victoria sponge, chatting animatedly about the weather and the Scherz affair. Halfway through her second cup, she had clutched her throat, gasped and collapsed, her face contorted in agony. Dr. Pritchard, summoned from his surgery across the lane, pronounced her dead within minutes. The tea, analysed by a police chemist, contained cyanide, a lethal dose, swift and merciless. Craddock, now at Little Paddocks, stood in the dining room, his lean frame taut with frustration. The household gathered around the polished mahogany table, their faces a study in shock and suspicion. Letitia Blacklock, her dark hair neatly pinned, sat at the head, her spectacles glinting as she answered Craddock's questions with measured calm. "I can't fathom it, Inspector," she said, her voice steady. "Dora was harmless, fussy, yes, but no one's enemy." Her hand, adjusting a napkin, betrayed a faint tremor, and Craddock noted it, his pen poised over his notebook. Patrick Simmons, sprawled in a chair, ran a hand through his hair, his usual charm dimmed. "It's mad, isn't it? First Scherz, now Bunny. Someone's got it in for this house." His tone was light, but his eyes darted to Letitia, as if seeking her lead. Julia Simmons, standing by the window, lit a cigarette. Her green eyes narrowed. "Don't be theatrical, Pat," she said sharply. "Dora probably ate something off. These old cafes aren't exactly sterile." Her coolness, Craddock thought, was a shield. But against what? Philippa Hames, seated quietly, twisted a ring on her finger, her blonde hair falling over her pale face. "She was so kind to me," she murmured, almost to herself. "Always asking after my boy." Her grief seemed genuine, yet Craddock caught a glance she cast at Letitia, wary, almost questioning. Mitzi, summoned from the kitchen, hovered in the doorway, her dark curls wild, her apron clutched in trembling hands. "I know nothing," she declared, her voice shrill. "I make no tea. I touch no poison." Craddock, used to her outbursts, dismissed her gently, but her fear, he noted, was real. The inquest, held that morning in the village hall, had been a grim affair. Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively at the back, had watched the proceedings with keen interest, her knitting bag at her feet. The coroner, a dour man from Milchester, confirmed cyanide as the cause of death, likely administered in the tea. Mrs. Lucas, tearful on the stand, swore her kitchen was spotless, her supplies untainted. The teapot, shared by 2 other customers who suffered no ill effects, pointed to Dora's cup as the target. A deliberate act, the coroner concluded, and the village gasped, their whispers filling the hall like a rising tide. Miss Marple, walking back to the vicarage, had paused by the Bluebird Café, its windows shuttered in mourning. She recalled Dora's visit to Little Paddocks 2 days prior, when the older woman had seemed distracted, her chatter veering to old memories. "Letty and I, we were such girls then," she had said, her eyes misty. "And Lottie, oh, I mean Letty, of course." The slip had struck Miss Marple, as had Dora's unease when shown a photograph of the Blacklock sisters, one with a scarf, hiding her throat. "Dora knew something," Miss Marple murmured, her needles resuming their rhythm. "And someone ensured she'd never tell." At Little Paddocks, Craddock pressed the household for alibis. Letitia had been at home, writing letters. Patrick claimed a walk to the village shop, though the grocer couldn't recall him. Julia, in Milchester for a lecture, had returned late. Philippa had been at the nursery, her employer confirming her presence. Mitzi, in the kitchen, had no witnesses but her pots. Craddock, frustrated, turned to motives. "Miss Bunner mentioned your inheritance, Miss Blacklock," he said. "Could someone have targeted her to get to you?" Letitia's smile was faint. Dora loved to talk, Inspector, but she was no threat to anyone. Craddock's thoughts turned to Belle Godler's letter, received the previous day. Belle had described Letitia's wartime scar, a jagged mark on her ear from a bomb fragment, yet Letitia's ear, grazed by Scherz's bullet, showed no such scar, only smooth skin beneath the bandage. He kept this to himself, but the discrepancy gnawed at him, a thread that refused to lie flat. He questioned Julia next, alone in the study, probing her cool demeanor. "You seemed close to Miss Bunner," he said, testing. Julia's eyes flicked up, sharp. "Hardly. She was a bore, always prattling about the past. But I didn't poison her, if that's what you mean." Her defiance, Craddock thought, hid a flicker of unease. Miss Marple, meanwhile, pursued her own inquiries. She visited the Bluebird Café, now reopened, and sat at a corner table, her tea untouched. Mrs. Lucas, wiping down the counter, welcomed her with a nervous smile. "Such a tragedy, Miss Marple. Poor Miss Bunner was a regular, you know." Miss Marple's questions were gentle, drawing out details. Dora had arrived alone, but a man, tall, in a raincoat, had lingered near her table, leaving just before her collapse. "I didn't see his face," Mrs. Lucas admitted. "It was busy, you see." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the man's anonymity, the ease with which a cup could be tampered with in a crowded room. Her next stop was the vicarage, where she borrowed a bicycle and rode to Deas Hall, home of Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd. The 2 women, sturdy and practical, were tending their hens, their tweeds muddy from the wet earth. Miss Hinchcliffe, blunt as ever, greeted her. "Come to Sleuth, Miss Marple. We heard about Bunny. Damned shame." Over tea in their cluttered parlour, Miss Marple steered the talk to Dora's final days. Miss Murgatroyd, softer than her companion, frowned. "She was odd lately, you know. Kept talking about Letitia's sister, Charlotte. said she wasn't sure any more, as if she doubted something. Miss Hinchcliffe snorted. Bunny was always muddled. But poison, that's cold, isn't it? Miss Marple's needles clicked, her thoughts on Dora's confusion. She recalled a moment at Little Paddocks, when Dora had hesitated over a letter, her fingers trembling as she mentioned Lottie again. Memory, Miss Marple said softly, can be a dangerous thing. She thanked her hosts, cycling back through the dusk, her mind turning to the photograph of the Blacklock sisters, one face clear, the other obscured. A masquerade, she thought, was taking shape, its contours still vague but growing sharper. Craddock, back at the police station, pored over reports. The cyanide, traced to a local chemist, had been stolen weeks prior, no suspect named. Schertz's bank account, swollen by that mysterious payment, led to a dead end. A trust fund with no clear owner. But a new lead emerged. A hotel maid at the Royal Spa recalled Scherz boasting of easy money from a woman he'd met with Letitia. Not Miss Blacklock herself, the maid insisted. Someone younger, posh. Craddock's mind flashed to Julia, her aloofness a perfect mask for secrets. He resolved to confront her, but first he needed more. That evening, Miss Marple dined at the vicarage, her thoughts elsewhere as Mrs. Harmon chattered about village life. The vicar, sensing her distraction, offered a book on Swiss medical clinics, a relic of his student days. "You mentioned Switzerland, Miss Marple," he said. "Thought it might interest you." Miss Marple's eyes brightened. She paged through it later, noting clinics that treated goitre, Charlotte Blacklock's supposed ailment. A name, Clinique Valmont, caught her eye, its address matching Letitia's vague mention of her travels. "A thread," she murmured, "but where does it lead?" At Little Paddocks, the household dined in silence, the empty chair at the table a stark reminder of Dora's absence. Letitia, serving soup, maintained her poise, but her eyes lingered on the door as if expecting another blow. Patrick, pushing his plate away, muttered, "This place is cursed." Julia, sipping wine, said nothing, her face unreadable. Philippa, clearing the dishes, moved like a ghost, her thoughts locked away. Mitzi, in the kitchen, hummed a mournful tune, her knife chopping carrots with unnecessary force. Craddock, driving back to Milchester, felt the case pressing on him, a puzzle with too many edges. Dora's death, he knew, was no accident, but a link to Scherz's shooting, tied to the inheritance that loomed over Little Paddocks. He thought of Letitia's missing scar, Julia's defiance, the man in the raincoat, and somewhere, he sensed, a mind was at work, calculating, waiting for the next move. Miss Marple, now in her room at Dolly's cottage, sat by a lamp, her knitting untouched. She opened the Swiss clinic book, her finger tracing a passage on patient records. "If Charlotte lived," she whispered, "or if she didn't, someone knows." Her eyes, sharp as the night outside, saw not the page but a stage, where players moved in shadow, their motives as deadly as the poison that had silenced Dora Bunner. The game, she knew, was far from over. Chapter 6. Cracks in the Story. The pale sun of early November hung low over Chipping Cleghorn, casting long shadows across the village green, and bathing Little Paddocks in a cold, unforgiving light. 5 days had passed since Rudy Schertz's death, and one since Dora Bunner's poisoning, yet the house seemed to crouch under the weight of its secrets. Its Georgian facade a mask for the tensions within. The village, too, was restless, its usual rhythms disrupted by whispers of murder and betrayal. At the vicarage, Miss Jane Marple sat in a chintz-covered armchair, her knitting needles moving with mechanical precision, her mild blue eyes fixed on a horizon only she could see. The deaths, she knew, were not isolated tragedies, but threads in a tapestry whose pattern was beginning to emerge. Inspector Dermot Craddock, stationed at Little Paddocks, felt the case pressing on him like a physical weight. His lean frame paced the drawing-room, where the memory of Schertz's crumpled body lingered in the polished floorboards. His notebook, now a thick catalogue of facts and contradictions, lay open on a side table, its pages marked with questions that refused easy answers. The cyanide that killed Dora Bunner had been traced to a stolen batch, but no suspect emerged. The screwdriver found near the tampered fuse box remained unclaimed, its owner a ghost in the village's tight-knit web. And Letitia Blacklock's missing scar, described by Belle Godler as a wartime wound, gnawed at him, a discrepancy that hinted at deeper deceptions. Craddock's morning had begun with a re-examination of the night Schertz died. He gathered the household in the dining room, their faces a gallery of unease. Letitia Blacklock sat at the head, her dark hair swept back, her spectacles glinting with a calm that seemed almost defiant. "I was in the drawing-room, Inspector," she said, her voice clear, "near the fireplace, with Dora." But Dora, now dead, could not confirm it, and no other guest placed Letitia precisely during the blackout. Craddock's pen scratched, his eyes on her hands, which folded a napkin with deliberate care. Patrick Simmons, slouching against a chair, claimed he'd been outside, checking the garden gate when the lights failed. "Bit of a lark, I thought, till the shots started," he said, his grin strained. Craddock, recalling the grocer's failure to confirm Patrick's earlier alibi, pressed him. "No one saw you, Mr. Simmons. Convenient, isn't it?" Patrick's eyes narrowed, but he shrugged. "Can't help it if I'm invisible, Inspector." His flippancy, Craddock noted, masked a flicker of nerves, like a man playing a hand. Wasn't sure he could win. Julia Simmons, perched on a window seat, was more guarded. Her auburn hair was pulled tight, her green eyes cool as she lit a cigarette. "I was upstairs, changing for dinner," she said. "Heard the commotion and came down after the lights were back." Her medical student's precision made her story tidy, but Craddock caught a hesitation, as if she'd rehearsed it one too many times. "You didn't see Miss Blacklock in the hall?" he asked. Julia's gaze flicked to Letitia, then away. "No, it was dark, wasn't it?" Her tone was sharp, closing the door on further questions. Philippa Hames, her blonde hair falling over a pale face, sat quietly, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "I was at the nursery until 6, she said softly. "I got home just before the guests arrived." Her employer had confirmed her hours, but Craddock noted her reluctance to meet his eyes, as if she feared revealing more than her words. Mitzi, summoned from the kitchen, was predictably volatile. "I was cooking, always cooking," she snapped, her dark curls bouncing. "I hear shots, I hide. You think I run about in dark?" Craddock, weary of her theatrics, let her go, but her insistence on isolation struck him as too convenient. The alibis, Craddock realized, were like a house of cards, plausible individually, but shaky when stacked together. Someone had tampered with the fuse box, someone had lured Shirts to his death, and someone had poisoned Dora's tea. He turned to the guests from that fateful night, tracking them down across the village. Colonel Easterbrook, polishing his medals, at home, swore he'd been near the drawing-room door, too far to see Letitia. His wife Laura giggled nervously, claiming she'd been all aflutter, and saw nothing. Mrs. Swettenham, sipping tea at the Bluebird Cafe, insisted she'd been chatting with Miss Murgatroyd, their backs to the hall. Edmund, her son, had been at the drinks tray, his writer's eye noting only a general scrum. The breakthrough came from Miss Hinchcliffe, whom Miss Marple visited that afternoon at Deas Hall. The farmer, her tweeds muddy from tending pigs, offered tea in a cluttered kitchen, her blunt manner a contrast to the village's evasions. "You're digging, aren't you, Miss Marple?" she said, her eyes shrewd. "Good. This business stinks." Over chipped mugs, she recounted the night of Shirts's death. "I was by the window, trying to keep Murgatroyd from fussing. When the lights went out, I saw something, a shadow, moving fast, not Shirts, someone from inside slipping toward the hall." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing the detail. "Before the shots?" she asked. Hinchcliffe nodded. "Just before. Couldn't make out who. Too dark." Miss Marple, thanking her, cycled back to the vicarage, her thoughts racing. A shadow inside moving before Shirts's entrance suggested an orchestrator, not a bystander. She recalled the fuse box, its wires deliberately loosened, and the screwdriver, unclaimed but telling. At Little Paddocks, she had noticed a tool shed near the garden, its contents haphazard, but including wire cutters and pliers. The boots she'd seen men's, size 10, didn't fit Patrick's larger feet or Mitzi's small ones. "Someone," she murmured, "is playing a very careful game." Craddock, meanwhile, pursued a new lead. The bank account tied to Shirts's payment had yielded a name, not a person, but a trust linked to a Chipping Cleghorn address. The trail led to a solicitor in Milchester, Mr. Weatherby, a fussy man with a penchant for secrecy. "The trust is private, Inspector," he said, adjusting his tie. "I can't divulge details without a court order." Craddock, pressing, learned the trust was managed for a lady of means, but Weatherby's lips sealed tighter than his briefcase. Frustrated, Craddock returned to Little Paddocks, where Letitia was pruning roses in the garden, her gloves stained with earth. "Miss Blacklock," he said, watching her closely, "do you know of any trusts in your name, perhaps tied to Mr. Godler?" Letitia's shears paused, then snipped a wilted bloom. "None, Inspector. My finances are straightforward. Savings, the house, and Randall's will." Her voice was calm, but Craddock noted her grip on the shears, knuckles whitening. Briefly, he mentioned the shadow Hinchcliffe saw, probing for a reaction. Letitia's smile was faint. Miss Hinchcliffe's imagination, perhaps. It was chaos, you know. Her dismissal was smooth, but Craddock sensed a wall, built with practised care. Miss Marple, back at Dolly's cottage, pored over the Swiss clinic book, her finger tracing a passage on goiter treatments. Clinique Valmont, where Charlotte Blacklock supposedly died, was known for surgical precision, but its records, she learned from a letter to the vicar's cousin in Geneva, were incomplete after a wartime fire. No death certificate for a Charlotte. Blacklock, the cousin wrote. A patient left in 1920 cured, but her name was unclear. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. If Charlotte lived, she whispered, what became of Letitia? The photograph at Little Paddocks, 2 sisters, one scarred by illness, loomed in her mind, its implications chilling. Her thoughts were interrupted by a visit from Philippa Hames, who arrived at the cottage, her face pale, her navy coat damp from a sudden shower. Miss Marple, I had to come, she said, her voice low. It's about Dora. She was trying to tell me something before the cafe. Miss Marple, offering tea, listened as Philippa recounted Dora's agitation. She kept saying, it's not right, Pip, it's not her. I thought she meant Letitia's ear, the greys, but now I wonder. Philippa's eyes, shadowed with doubt, met Miss Marple's. What did she know? Miss Marple's tone was gentle. Sometimes, my dear, the truth is too heavy to carry alone. Philippa's words echoed Craddock's findings. At the inquest, a witness, a boy delivering milk, had seen Dora lingering outside the cafe, clutching a letter, her face troubled. The letter, found in her handbag, was mundane, a note from a cousin, but its envelope bore a faint pencil mark. Lottie? Craddock, examining it, felt a prickle of recognition. Dora's slip, calling Letitia Lottie, now took on new weight. He confronted Letitia in the study, his tone direct. Miss Bunner seemed confused about you, Miss Blacklock. Any reason she'd call you by your sister's name? Letitia's laugh was light. Dora was sentimental, Inspector. She mixed us up sometimes. Sisters, you know. Her explanation was plausible, but Craddock's instinct screamed otherwise. The village, meanwhile, churned with speculation. The post office, Miss Lucas swore Dora had received a package days before her death, its sender unknown. The baker claimed a stranger, a woman veiled, had asked for Little Paddocks' address. Craddock, sifting rumour from fact, sent his sergeant, Fletcher, to track the package, though he suspected it was another dead end. His focus returned to the household, where tensions simmered. Patrick, caught sneaking a brandy, snapped at Julia's rebuke. "Lay off, sis. We're all on edge." Julia, retreating to her room, locked the door, her face pale. Philippa, tending. The garden avoided Mitzi's accusing stares. Letitia, ever the anchor, moved through the house, her poise a beacon or a facade. Miss Marple, dining at the vicarage, steered the talk to village families, drawing out Mrs. Harmon's knowledge of the Blacklocks. Dr. Blacklock was a dear man, the vicar's wife said. His girls were so alike, but Charlotte was sickly, always wrapped up. Letitia was the strong one. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the photograph, the scarf, the missing scar. Strength, she said softly, can be a mask, can't it? Later, in her room, she wrote to the vicar's cousin, requesting more on Clinique Valmont. "A name," she murmured, "or a face. One will break this open." Craddock, driving to Milchester, replayed the case. Scherze's payment, Dora's, poison, the shadow in the hall. All pointed to an insider, someone with access and motive. He thought of Letitia's calm, Patrick's nerves, Julia's secrets, Philippa's doubts, Mitzi's fear, and the trust, its lady of means a phantom he couldn't yet name. At Little Paddocks, The evening settled uneasily, the household dining in silence, each glance a question, each pause a suspicion. Outside the wind rose, rattling the windows, as if urging the truth to surface. Miss Marple, by her cottage lamp, closed the clinic book, her knitting untouched. Her mind saw a stage, its players moving in shadow, Letitia, or someone wearing her name, Charlotte, dead or alive, Dora, silenced for what she knew. Cracks, she whispered, are where the light gets in. The puzzle, she sensed, was nearing a turn, its pieces poised to fall into a pattern as deadly as it was clever. Chapter 7. Echoes from Abroad. The chill of November deepened in Chipping Cleghorn, the village wrapped in a mist that clung to its hedgerows and blurred the outlines of Little Paddocks. 6 days had passed since Rudy Schertz's death, 2 since Dora Bunner's poisoning, and the house, once a haven of routine, now pulsed with suspicion. The villagers, their curiosity sharpened by fear, traded theories in hushed tones. At the Bluebird Cafe, the post office, the church porch, each whisper adding to the web of doubt surrounding Letitia Blacklock's household. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced at the vicarage, sat by a crackling fire, her knitting needles idle, her mild blue eyes tracing patterns in the flames. The case, she sensed, was tilting toward revelation, its secrets like leaves stirred by an unseen wind. Inspector Dermot Craddock, his lean frame hunched over a desk in Little Paddocks' study, felt the weight of the investigation pressing harder. His notebook, now a dense chronicle of clues and contradictions, lay open, its margins crowded with question marks. The cyanide that killed Dora remained untraceable beyond its theft from a Milchester chemist. The screwdriver by the fuse box, the shadow Miss Hinchcliffe saw, the missing scar on Letitia's ear, all pointed to a plot woven with chilling precision. But the thread that tugged most insistently was the Swiss connection, tied to Charlotte Blacklock's supposed death and Letitia's enigmatic past. Craddock's morning began with a letter from Clinique Valmont, prompted by Miss Marple's inquiry, through the vicar's cousin in Geneva. The response, written in precise French, confirmed that a Miss Blacklock, first name unclear, had been treated for goitre in 1919. Surgery had been successful, but the patient left abruptly in 1920, her records lost in a fire during the clinic's wartime evacuation. No death was recorded, only a note that the patient, much improved, had returned to England. Craddock's brow furrowed as he read, the words echoing Belle Godler's vague recollection of Charlotte's demise. "If Charlotte didn't die," he murmured, "where is she now?" He drove to Little Paddocks, the mist parting before his car like a reluctant curtain. Letitia Blacklock greeted him in the hall, her dark hair pinned neatly, her tweed dress impeccable despite the strain in her hazel eyes. "Inspector, you're early," she said, her smile polite but thin. "More questions, I presume?" Craddock nodded, following her to the drawing-room, where a fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the chintz curtains. He chose his words carefully, watching her face. "Miss Blacklock, can you clarify your sister Charlotte's death? The clinic in Switzerland has no record of it." Letitia's hand, adjusting a vase of chrysanthemums, paused, then resumed its task. "Charlotte died in 1920, Inspector," she said, her voice steady. after her surgery. The clinic was chaotic then. War, you know. Records were likely lost. Her explanation was plausible, but Craddock noted the slight tightening of her lips, the way her spectacles caught the firelight, masking her gaze. "And you were there?" he pressed. Letitia nodded. "Briefly. I brought her home, but she was too ill. She passed soon after." Her tone was final, but Craddock's instinct, honed by years of interrogations, sensed a seam in her story, ready to split. His next lead came from the bank in Chipping Cleghorn, where Schertz's mysterious payment had originated. The trust, managed by Mr. Weatherby in Milchester, had finally yielded a clue. A withdrawal slip, signed by Julia Simmons, dated days before Schertz's death. Craddock confronted her in the garden, where she was pruning roses, her auburn hair tucked under a scarf, her green eyes wary. "Miss Simmons," he said, holding up the slip, "care to explain this?" Julia's shears snipped a stem, her movements deliberate. "I needed cash," she said coolly. "Exams, books, you know. I borrowed from the trust. Family funds. Nothing sinister." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "And Scherz? Did you pay him?" Julia's laugh was sharp. "For what? To play bandit? Don't be absurd, Inspector." Her defiance was convincing, but Craddock caught a flicker of panic, quickly masked. He pushed further, mentioning the maid's story of Scherz meeting a posh woman. Julia's face hardened. "Gossip, Inspector. I'm a student, not a conspirator." She turned back to her roses, but Craddock noted her trembling hands, the shears cutting too deep into a stem. Meanwhile, Miss Marple pursued her own inquiries, her approach as subtle as the mist outside. She visited the vicarage, library, where the vicar, delighted by her interest, unearthed a box of old parish newsletters. "From Dr. Blacklock's time," he said, dusting off a folder. "Might amuse you." Miss Marple, her fingers deft, paged through faded pages, her eyes scanning for mentions of the Blacklock sisters. A 1918 notice caught her attention. "Miss Letitia Blacklock, aiding the war effort in London, sends regards to her sister Charlotte, recovering abroad." No mention of Charlotte's return, only a later note in 1921, naming Letitia as her aunt's heir. "No Charlotte," Miss Marple murmured, her needles clicking, as if she vanished. Her thoughts turned to Dora Bunner's final days, of nervous slips about Lottie, and the photograph at Little Paddocks. Two sisters, one with a scarf hiding her throat. She recalled Philippa Hames's visit, Dora's cryptic words. "It's not her." Miss Marple's mind, sharp as her knitting needle, saw a possibility too audacious to dismiss. She wrote to the vicar's cousin again, requesting any surviving photographs from Clinique Valmont's archives, however faint. "A face," she whispered, "will tell more than a name." At Little Paddocks, the household moved through the day like actors in a strained play. Patrick Simmons, lounging in the drawing-room, teased Philippa about her gardening. "You're turning into a regular farmer, Pip," he said, his grin forced. Philippa, her blonde hair tied back, smiled faintly. "It keeps me busy, Patrick." Her voice was soft, but Miss Marple, arriving for tea at Letitia's invitation, noted the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes avoided Patrick's. Julia, returning from Milchester, slammed her bag on the hall table, her face pale. "Exams," she muttered, brushing past Mitzi, who was polishing silver with furious energy. Letitia, Serving tea maintained her poise, but Miss Marple caught the strain in her movements, the way her hand lingered on the teapot. "You're very kind to visit again, Miss Marple," she said, passing a cup. "We're all a bit adrift, I'm afraid." Miss Marple's smile was disarming. "Grief does that, my dear. Poor Miss Bunner, she was so fond of you." Letitia's expression softened, but her eyes behind her spectacles were guarded. "Dora was like a sister," she said, "more than Charlotte in some ways." The mention of Charlotte, unprompted, struck Miss Marple, and she filed it away, her needles clicking softly. The conversation turned to village matters, but Miss Marple steered it gently, probing the household's dynamics. Patrick, she learned, had no fixed income, relying on Letitia's generosity. Julia's studies were funded by a scholarship, but her spending, new dresses, cigarettes, suggested another source. Philippa, scraping by on her nursery wages, sent every spare penny to her son's boarding school. Mitzi paid well for her cooking, saved obsessively, dreaming of a return to Hungary. Each detail, Miss Marple knew, was a thread in the tapestry, and one was beginning to pull loose. Craddock's next move took him to Belgodler's Manor, where the ailing widow received him in a room heavy with brocade and memory. Belle, her hands frail but her mind sharp, spoke fondly of Letitia. She was Randall's rock, she said, her voice a whisper. So capable, so like her father. Charlotte was different, delicate, always hiding her throat. Poor dear, died so young. Craddock, probing, asked about their resemblance. Belle's eyes twinkled. Oh, like twins almost, but Charlotte's illness marked her. Letitia was the beauty, though she'd laugh at that. Her words, warm with affection, carried a shadow of doubt, and Craddock pressed. "You're sure Charlotte died?" Belle's smile faded. "Letitia told me so. I never saw the body, but why would she lie?" The question hung unanswered as Craddock took his leave. Back in Chipping Cleghorn, the village churned with fresh rumours. The postmistress swore a telegram had arrived for Letitia, its contents unknown. The baker claimed to have seen Patrick near the Bluebird Cafe the day Dora died, though Patrick denied it. Craddock, sifting fact from fiction, returned to Little Paddocks, where he found Miss Marple in the garden, examining a bed of late-blooming asters. "Inspector," she said, her tone neighbourly, "you look troubled." Craddock, trusting her insight, shared the clinic's letter and Julia's withdrawal slip. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "A trust," she said softly, "is a fine place to hide money, and a sister, perhaps, to hide a life." Their talk was interrupted by Patrick, storming out to defend Julia. "Leave her alone, Craddock," he snapped, his face flushed. "She's no killer, and you know it." Craddock, calm, noted his protectiveness, the way his hands clenched. "I'm only seeking truth, Mr. Simmons," he said. Patrick's laugh was bitter. "Truth? In this house? Good luck." He stalked off, and Miss Marple, watching him go, murmured, "Loyalty, Inspector, can be as dangerous as deceit." That evening Miss Marple dined at the vicarage, her thoughts on Belle's words, the clinic's letter, Dora's slips. Mrs. Harmon, eager for news, pressed her. "Is it a conspiracy, Miss Marple? Someone after Letitia's money?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Money, my dear, is a powerful lure, but so is identity." Later, in her room, she opened a new letter from the vicar's cousin, enclosing a grainy photograph From Clinique Valmont's archives, 2 women, one with a bandaged throat, stood arm in arm, their faces strikingly similar. "Letitia and Charlotte," she whispered, "or one playing both parts." At Little Paddocks, the household gathered for dinner, the table set with strained civility. Letitia, carving lamb, spoke of village events, her voice a tether against the silence. Patrick, sipping wine, avoided Julia's gaze, her face pale as she pushed food around her plate. Philippa, clearing dishes, moved quietly, her eyes on Letitia, as if searching for a crack in her composure. Mitzi, serving dessert, muttered about cursed houses, her hands shaking. Outside the mist thickened, muffling the world, as if guarding the truth that lay just beyond reach. Craddock, in his Milchester lodgings, pored over the clinic's letter, the withdrawal slip, Bell's testimony. The pieces were there, Scherz's payment, Dora's poison, the shadow, the scar, but they refused to align. He thought of Letitia's calm, Julia's defiance, Patrick's loyalty, Philippa's doubts, Mitzi's fear. And Charlotte, the absent sister whose echo grew louder, a ghost demanding to be seen. Miss Marple, by her cottage lamp, studied the photograph, her knitting untouched. Her mind saw a stage, its players shifting roles, Letitia, or someone claiming her name, Charlotte, dead or alive, Dora, silenced for her knowledge. Echoes, she whispered, carry truth if you listen. The puzzle, she knew, was nearing, its heart, its secrets poised to unravel in a moment as sharp and final as a needle's point. Chapter 8. The net tightens. The mist that had shrouded Chipping Cleghorn for days thickened into a fog by the evening of November 4th, muffling the village in a grey embrace that seemed to mirror the unease within Little Paddocks. The house, its ivy-clad walls damp and glistening, stood as a fortress of secrets, its windows glowing faintly against the encroaching dark. A week had passed since Rudy Scherz's death, 3 days since Dora Bunner's poisoning, and the village buzzed with a feverish blend of fear and fascination. At the vicarage, Miss Jane Marple sat by a lamp in the guest room, her knitting needle still, her mild blue eyes fixed on a photograph from Clinique Valmont. 2 sisters, one with a bandaged throat, their faces hauntingly alike. The case, she felt, was reaching a crescendo, its threads tightening into a knot that would soon unravel. Inspector Dermot Craddock, stationed at Little Paddocks, paced the study, his notebook a labyrinth of clues that refused to align. The Swiss clinic's letter, confirming no death for Charlotte Blacklock, had deepened the mystery of Letitia's identity. Julia Simmons' withdrawal from the trust, linked to Scherz's payment, suggested complicity, yet her defiance held firm. The shadow Miss Hinchcliffe saw, the unclaimed screwdriver, the stolen cyanide, all pointed to an insider, a mind orchestrating chaos with surgical precision. Craddock's lean frame tensed as he reviewed his latest lead. A telegram, intercepted at the post office, addressed to Letitia, its cryptic message, "All is known," unsigned but postmarked from Milchester. He resolved to stage a confrontation, to shake the household's fragile equilibrium. With Miss Marple's counsel, sought over tea at the vicarage, he planned a gathering at Little Paddocks, a calculated move to force the truth into the open. "People," Miss Marple had said, her voice soft but certain, reveal themselves under pressure, Inspector, like tea leaves in hot water. Craddock, trusting her insight, arranged the event for that evening, inviting the household and key villagers, Colonel Easterbrook, Miss Hinchcliffe, Mrs. Swettenham, to witness what he hoped would be a breaking point. At 6 o'clock, Little Paddocks' drawing-room was ablaze with light, its chintz curtains drawn against the fog. Letitia Blacklock, in a navy dress, her spectacles glinting, greeted the guests with a composure that Craddock found almost unnerving. "Inspector, you've turned my home into a stage," she said, her smile thin. "I hope it's worth the drama." Patrick Simmons, lounging by the fireplace, raised a glass of sherry. "To mystery solved, eh, Craddock? Or are we in for another shock?" His charm was strained, his eyes darting to Julia, who stood by the window, her auburn hair severe, her cigarette sending curls of smoke into the air. Philippa Hames, pale in a grey frock, arranged biscuits on a tray, her movements mechanical, her grey eyes shadowed with worry. Mitzi, summoned to serve tea, muttered darkly about mad English games, her hands trembling as she poured. Colonel Easterbrook, his medals polished, stood stiffly, murmuring to his wife, Laura, who giggled nervously. Miss Hinchcliffe in tweeds surveyed the room like a hawk, her blunt presence a counterpoint to Mrs. Swettenham's anxious chatter. Edmund, her son, scribbled in a notebook, his writer's eye cataloguing the scene. Craddock, standing by the mantel, cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "Thank you for coming," he began, his tone measured. "We're here to clarify the events that have shaken this house. Schertz's death, Miss Bunner's murder, and the questions they raise." He paused, his eyes on Letitia, whose hands, folded neatly in her lap, betraying no tremor. "I have news," he continued, his words deliberate. "Mrs. Belgodler, whose will ties to Miss Blacklock's inheritance, passed away this morning. The fortune is now active, pending legalities." A gasp rippled through the room. Letitia's face paled, her spectacles slipping slightly as she adjusted them. Patrick's glass froze midway to his lips, his grin fading. Julia's cigarette trembled, ash falling to the carpet. Philippa's tray rattled, a biscuit sliding to the floor. Mitzi, in the doorway, crossed herself, her eyes wide. Colonel Easterbrook coughed. Laura clutched his arm, and Mrs. Swettenham whispered, "Good heavens!" Miss Hinchcliffe's eyes narrowed, her gaze locked on Letitia, as if sensing a shift in the air. Craddock pressed on, his voice steady. "This changes motives, doesn't it? Wealth, so close, can turn allies into enemies." He produced the telegram, holding it aloft. "This arrived today for Miss Blacklock. All is known." "Care to explain, Miss Blacklock?" Letitia's smile was faint, almost amused. "A prank, Inspector, like the advertisement. Someone enjoyed stirring trouble." Her calm was a wall, but Craddock saw a crack. Her fingers, twisting a ring, betrayed a fleeting panic. Miss Marple, seated quietly in a corner, her knitting bag at her feet, watched the room with the intensity of a chess master. She had urged Craddock to mention Bell's death, though the news was false, a ruse to provoke reaction. Letitia's pallor, Patrick's tension, Julia's tremor confirmed her suspicions. The inheritance was the heart of the plot, and someone feared its exposure. She noted Philippa's silence, the way her eyes lingered on Letitia, not with fear, but with a curious pity. Mitzi's agitation, too, spoke of knowledge, however fragmented. The gathering was interrupted by a scream from the kitchen. Mitzi burst in, her apron askew, her voice shrill. "I see her! Miss Blacklock, with a gun, in the pantry. She means to kill us all." The room erupted. Laura gasped. Colonel Easterbrook barked, "Nonsense!" And Patrick swore. Letitia rose, her voice sharp. "Mitzi, control yourself. I was nowhere near the pantry." Craddock, seizing the moment, led a search, his Sergeant Fletcher at his side. The pantry, cramped and lined with jars, held no gun, only a spilled bag of flour and Mitzi's trembling figure. "I swear it," she sobbed. "I see her shadow, holding it." Craddock, sceptical but thorough, questioned Mitzi alone. Her story wavered. First a gun, then something shiny. But her fear was undeniable. He returned to the drawing-room, where Letitia had restored order, offering fresh tea with a smile that belied the chaos. Miss Marple, rising to help, brushed past Letitia, her fingers grazing the woman's hand. No scar, she noted, no trace of the wartime wound Belle described. The realization, sharp as a needle's point, solidified her theory. The woman before them was not Letitia Blacklock. At 8, Craddock dismissed the guests, their faces a mix of relief and unease. Miss Hinchcliffe lingered, her voice low. "That shadow I saw, Inspector. It wasn't Letitia. Too slight, too quick. Keep your eyes on this lot." Craddock nodded, his mind on Mitzi's outburst, the telegram, the trust. He conferred with Miss Marple in the hall, her presence a quiet anchor. "You saw her hands, Inspector," she said softly. "No scar, no mark. And Dora's words, it's not her. We're close, but we need proof." Craddock, trusting her, agreed to a final push, a public unveiling at the village hall the next day. Miss Marple returned to the vicarage, her umbrella raised against the fog. She sat by her lamp, the Clinique Valmont photograph before her, its faces, Letitia and Charlotte, or one masquerading as both, haunting her thoughts. She recalled Belle's mead description. Charlotte, marked by goitre, hiding her throat. Letitia, unscarred, the stronger twin. The clinic's letter, confirming a patient's survival, pointed to a swap, a deception born of greed or survival. "Charlotte," she whispered, "alive and wearing her sister's name." The photograph, the telegram, Dora's slips, all converged on a truth as bold as it was deadly. Craddock, at Little Paddocks, conducted a final sweep. In the study, he found a locked drawer, its key missing. Forcing it open, he discovered a letter, its ink faded but legible, addressed to Lottie from a Swiss nurse, dated 1921. "Your sister's death was a mercy," it read, "but you must live for her now." The words, ambiguous yet damning, confirmed his suspicions. Pocketed it, his mind racing. Letitia or Charlotte had orchestrated Schertz's robbery to fake a threat, silencing Dora when her doubts grew too loud. But who were her allies? Patrick with his loyalty, Julia with her secrets, or another, unseen, the village, unaware of the gathering storm, whispered on. At the post office, Miss Lucas swore Letitia had burned a letter, its ashes scattered in the garden. The baker claimed to have seen Julia near the chemist's weeks ago, her face hidden by a scarf. Craddock, sifting rumour, focused on the household. He confronted Patrick in the garden, his tone sharp. "You're protective of Julia, Mr. Simmons. Why? What do you know?" Patrick's face darkened. "She's my sister, Craddock. I'd die for her. That's all you need to know." His passion, Craddock thought, was a shield. But for whom? The vicarage. Miss Marple dined with Mrs. Harmon, her thoughts elsewhere. The vicar's wife, sensing her distraction, pressed. "You're close to solving it, aren't you, Miss Marple? Is it Letitia? Or someone else?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "The truth, my dear, is like a knot, tight, but not impossible to undo." Later, she wrote to the vicar's cousin, requesting any final scraps from Clinique Valmont's archives. A signature, a witness, anything to anchor her theory. "One piece," she murmured, "and the net will close." At Little Paddocks, the household retired early, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. Letitia, locking the doors, moved with quiet purpose, her face unreadable. Patrick, in his room, stared at a photograph of Julia, his jaw tight. Julia, brushing her hair, avoided her mirror, her eyes haunted. Philippa, writing to her son, paused, her pen trembling. Mitzi, in the kitchen, prayed softly, her rosary beads clicking. The house, silent but alive with secrets, waited for the dawn. Craddock, in his Milchester lodgings, reviewed the letter, the telegram, the photograph. The net was tightening, he knew, but the prey was cunning, its moves calculated to the last. He thought of Letitia's calm, Patrick's defiance, Julia's secrets, Philippa's pity, Mitzi's fear, and Charlotte, the ghost at the heart of it all, whose echo was now a roar, demanding to be heard. Miss Marple, by her lamp, closed the photograph. Her knitting untouched. Her mind saw a stage, its players poised for the final act, Letitia or Charlotte, Dora silenced, shirts a pawn. "The net," she whispered, "is never kind, but it is just." The fog outside thickened, but within the truth burned bright, ready to break free in a moment as sharp and inevitable as a needle's thrust. Chapter 9. The mask falls. The fog that had smothered Chipping Cleghorn for days lifted on the morning of November 5th, revealing a sky of piercing blue and a village taut with anticipation. Little Paddocks, its Georgian lines sharp in the crisp light, stood like a stage awaiting its final act. The deaths of Rudy Scherz and Dora Bunner had cast a pall over the community. But the promise of answers, heralded by Inspector Dermot Craddock's call for a gathering at the village hall, drew a crowd as surely as the original advertisement had. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the vicarage breakfast table, sipped tea, her knitting needles still, her mild blue eyes alight with the certainty of a puzzle nearing its solution. The threads, Charlotte's survival, Letitia's missing scar, the trust's payments, were converging, and today she knew the mask would fall. Craddock, at the police station in Milchester, reviewed his evidence with a clarity born of sleepless nights. The letter from Clinique Valmont, hinting at a surviving Blacklock sister, lay beside the intercepted telegram. All is known. And the Swiss nurse's note, found in Letitia's locked drawer, urging Lottie to live for her sister. Julia Simmons' withdrawal from the trust linked to Scherz's payment was damning, but her role remained unclear. The shadow Miss Hinchcliffe saw, the unclaimed screwdriver, the stolen cyanide, all pointed to a conspiracy rooted in the household, with Letitia, or someone wearing her name, at its heart. Craddock's lean frame tensed as he prepared for the village hall, where he and Miss Marple would lay bare the truth. The hall, a squat brick building adorned with faded bunting, filled rapidly by noon. Villagers, Mrs. Lucas from the café, the postmistress, the baker, mingled with the Little Paddocks household, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Letitia Blacklock arrived, her navy coat buttoned, her spectacles glinting, her composure a stark contrast to the whispers around her. Patrick Simmons, his naval charm frayed, escorted Julia, whose auburn hair was pulled tight, her green eyes defiant. Philippa Hames, pale in a grey scarf, kept her distance, her hands clasped tightly. Mitzi, coerced into attending, muttered about English madness, her dark curls bouncing with agitation. Colonel Easterbrook, Miss Hinchcliffe, and Mrs. Swettenham took seats near the front, their presence a reminder of the night Sherds died. Miss Marple, slipping in quietly, chose a chair at the side, her black handbag at her feet, her knitting untouched. She had met Craddock earlier, sharing her theory, a deception so bold it bordered on genius. Charlotte Blacklock, she had said, her voice soft but certain, did not die in Switzerland. She stands among us, wearing her sister's name, her sister's life. Craddock, trusting her insight, had agreed to let her lead the unveiling. Her gentle manner a disarming weapon against the guilty. Now, as the hall quieted, he took the stage, his voice clear, his notebook tucked away. "Ladies and gentlemen," Craddock began, his gaze sweeping the room, "we are here to resolve the tragedies that have struck Little Paddocks. Rudy Sherds's shooting and Dora Bunner's poisoning. These were not random acts, but a calculated plan, rooted in greed and deception." He paused, his eyes on Letitia, who sat erect, her face unreadable. The key lies in the Godler inheritance, now active with Belle Godler's passing. But it also lies in a name, Charlotte Blacklock, believed dead but very much alive. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Letitia's hand tightened on her handbag, but her smile remained fixed. Patrick shifted, his jaw clenching, while Julia's cigarette trembled, ash falling silently. Philippa's eyes widened, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Mitzi crossed herself, her breath hitching. Craddock stepped aside, gesturing to Miss Marple, who rose with a grace that belied her years, her voice gentle, but carrying the weight of truth. "My friends," Miss Marple began, her eyes moving over the room, "murder is a simple thing when you strip it bare. It begins with want, money, security, a life stolen or reclaimed. In this house we have seen such want, cloaked in a lie that began years ago." She held up the Clinique Valmont photograph, its grainy image projected by a lantern slide Craddock had arranged. Two women, one with a bandaged throat, stared out, their resemblance striking. "Letitia and Charlotte Blacklock," she said, "sisters so alike they could pass for one. But one, we were told, died in Switzerland. I say she did not." The hall was silent, every eye on Miss Marple. She turned to Letitia, her tone kind, but unrelenting. "You, my dear, are not Letitia Blacklock. You are Charlotte, cured of your goitre, returned to England to claim your sister's place. Letitia died, perhaps in the war, perhaps by your hand, and you took her name, her home, her future. The scar Belle Godler described from a bomb fragment is absent from your ear. Dora Bunner, your old friend, began to suspect, calling you Lottie, in her confusion. She had to be silenced, didn't she? Letitia's face drained of colour, her spectacles slipping as she gripped her chair. The crowd gasped, whispers erupting like sparks. Patrick leapt to his feet, his voice hoarse. "That's nonsense! Aunt Lettie's no impostor!" Julia grabbed his arm, her eyes blazing, but he shook her off. Philippa, trembling, stared at Letitia, her pity now clear. Mitzi, in the back, sobbed, "I knew it! The gun! The shadow!" Craddock, watching, signalled his sergeant to block the exits, sensing a breaking point. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "You staged Jersey's robbery, Charlotte, hiring him through the trust to create a threat, to graze your ear and feign danger. But you shot him, ensuring his silence just as you poisoned Dora's tea when her doubts grew too loud. The fuse box tampered with to guarantee darkness was your work, or your allies." She turned to Patrick, her eyes sharp. "Mr. Simmons, you were quick to restore the lights, weren't you? A lover's loyalty, perhaps, rigging the blackout to aid her plan." Patrick's face reddened, his fists clenching. "You're mad. Old woman, I'd never hurt anyone." But his voice cracked, and Julia's hand on his arm tightened, her face pale. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Julia. "And you, Miss Simmons, knew of the trust. Your withdrawals funded Sherds, though you claim innocence. Blackmailed, perhaps, to keep silent about your thefts." Julia's cigarette fell, her eyes wide with fear. But she said nothing, her silence damning. Letitia, or Charlotte, rose, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is absurd, Miss Marple. I am Letitia Blacklock, and I've no reason to kill. You've spun a tale from nothing. Photographs, old letters, a cook's hysterics." Her defiance was fierce, but Craddock stepped forward, holding the Swiss nurse's letter. "This, found in your drawer, speaks of Lottie living for her sister, and your ear, Miss Blacklock, bears no scar. Explain that." Letitia's hand touched her ear, a reflex, and for the first time her composure faltered, her eyes darting to the door. The crowd, sensing a climax, leaned forward. Colonel Easterbrook muttered about damned cleverness, while Miss Hinchcliffe's nod was grim, her suspicion of the shadow vindicated. Mrs. Swettenham clutched Edmund's arm, her voice a whisper. "It's true, isn't it? She's not Letitia." Philippa, tears in her eyes, spoke softly. "I knew Dora was right. It wasn't her." Mitzi, emboldened, shouted, "I see her with gun. I swear it." Charlotte, cornered, took a step toward the door, her face a mask of desperation. Craddock's sergeant blocked her path, and she stumbled, her handbag falling, spilling a key and a vial. Empty, but labelled with a chemist's mark. Craddock seized it, his voice sharp. "Cyanide, Miss Blacklock, or should I say Miss Charlotte?" The hall erupted, voices clamouring, as Charlotte collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face, her spectacles askew. Miss Marple, stepping forward, spoke gently, as if to a wounded child. "You wanted the Godler fortune, my dear, and Letitia's life. You cured your goitre, hid your past, and built a new identity. But Dora's memories, Sherds's greed, threatened it all. You killed to protect your lie, didn't you?" Charlotte's shoulders shook, her voice a broken whisper. "I had to. Letitia was gone. The war took her. I was alone, scarred, nothing. The money was mine by right." Her confession, raw and halting, silenced the room. She admitted hiring shirts, promising him cash to stage a robbery, then shooting him to ensure his silence. The graze on her ear, a deliberate ruse. Dora's poisoning, she confessed, was to stop her growing suspicions. The cyanide slipped into her tea at the cafe by a hired hand. A man in a raincoat now fled. Patrick, she revealed, was her lover, tampering with the fuse box to aid the plan, believing it a harmless charade. He didn't know I'd kill, she said, her eyes on Patrick, who stared horrified, his loyalty shattered. Julia, trembling, admitted her role, stealing from the trust, coerced into silence by Charlotte's threats to expose her thefts. I didn't know about the murders, she whispered, her face ashen. Philippa, innocent of the plot, was stunned to learn her own heritage. Revealed by Craddock as Randall Goadler's secret daughter, the true heir if Letitia, or Charlotte, failed to claim the fortune. "My father?" she gasped, her world shifting. Mitzi, vindicated, wept, her fear proven true. Craddock, his voice calm, signalled his sergeant. "Charlotte Blacklock, you're under arrest for the murders of Rudy Sherds and Dora Bunner." Patrick, rising to protest, was restrained, his complicity in the blackout enough for charges. Julia, cleared of murder but facing fraud, slumped, her defiance gone. The crowd, breathless, watched as Charlotte was led away, her head bowed, her mask finally shed. Patrick followed, his face a mask of betrayal, while Julia trailed, her steps heavy with shame. Miss Marple, gathering her handbag, slipped out quietly, her work done. The villagers, dispersing into the sunlight, buzzed with shock, their theories now fact. Mrs. Lucas swore she'd suspected Letitia all along. The postmistress claimed the telegram was her tip-off. Miss Hinchcliffe, shaking Craddock's hand, grunted, "Good work, but that old lady's the real brain." Colonel Easterbrook, muttering about justice, escorted Laura home, while Mrs. Swettenham, clutching Edmund, declared it better than a novel. At the vicarage, Miss Marple sipped tea with Mrs. Harmon. Her knitting resumed, her smile serene. The vicar's wife, bursting with questions, pressed. "How did you know, Miss Marple? Charlotte, pretending all these years?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "People, my dear, are like patterns. You see the shape if you look long enough. Charlotte wanted a life and she took it, but lies, you see, always unravel." She declined a second scone. Her thoughts on the photograph, the nurse's letter, Dora's slips, all the threads that had led to this day. Craddock, at Little Paddocks, oversaw the final search. The house now silent, its secrets laid bare. Philippa, reeling from her heritage, packed to visit her son, her future uncertain but free. Julia, released pending charges, left for Milchester, her medical dreams tainted but intact. Mitzi, vowing to leave England, stayed on, her fear replaced by a grudging respect for the truth. The Goadler fortune, Craddock learned, would pass to Philippa, its rightful heir, closing the circle of greed that had sparked the murders. As dusk fell, Miss Marple walked to the station, her umbrella tucked under her arm, her train to Meddenham Wells due. Craddock, seeing her off, marvelled at her quiet brilliance. "You're a wonder, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. She smiled, her voice soft. "Just an old spinster, Inspector, with a knack for noticing. Mind the village now. It's full of stories." The train whistled, and she boarded, her knitting bag at her side, her mind already drifting to other puzzles, other masks waiting to fall. Little Paddocks stood empty, its windows dark, its secrets spilled like blood on the floor. Chipping Cleghorn, shaken but enduring, turned to its routines. The murder's a tale to be told over tea, embellished with each telling. And Miss Marple, vanishing into the night, left behind a truth as sharp and certain as her needles, stitched into the fabric of a village forever changed. Chapter 10. Quiet Returns. The sun rose over Chipping Cleghorn on November 6th, its golden light spilling across the village green and bathing Little Paddocks in a serene glow that belied the turmoil of the past week. The fog had lifted, the air crisp and clear, as if the village itself exhaled after the revelations that had shaken its core. Charlotte Blacklock's confession, unmasked as the orchestrator of Rudy Schertz's shooting and Dora Bunner's poisoning, had rippled through the community like a stone cast into a still pond. The arrests of Charlotte and her accomplice, Patrick Simmons, had closed the case, yet the echoes of their crimes lingered, threading through conversations in cottages and shops. At the vicarage, Miss Jane Marple packed her small suitcase, her knitting needles tucked neatly into their bag, her mild blue eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction. The puzzle was solved, the truth laid bare. But her work, she knew, was never truly done until the village settled into its rhythms once more. Inspector Dermot Craddock stood in the garden of Little Paddocks, his lean frame silhouetted against the dew-kissed roses, his notebook now closed, its pages a testament to a case as intricate as any he'd faced. The village hall confrontation, guided by Miss Marple's unerring insight, had exposed Charlotte's masquerade as her sister Letitia, a deception born in the shadow of a Swiss clinic and fueled by the promise of the Gödler fortune. Patrick's role in tampering with the fuse box, Julia Simmons' coerced silence over her thefts, and Philippa Hames's unexpected heritage as Randall Gödler's daughter had unravelled a plot woven with greed and desperation. Craddock's task now was to tie up loose ends, to ensure the village's wounds could heal. But he felt the weight of Miss Marple's absence, her quiet brilliance a compass he'd come to rely on. The village, though stunned, was quick to reclaim its routines. At the Bluebird Café, Mrs. Lucas polished her counter, her voice bright as she recounted the hall's drama to a cluster of customers. "I knew there was something off about Miss Blacklock," she declared, ignoring her own prior praises of Letitia's generosity. The postmistress, sorting letters, whispered to the baker about Charlotte's foreign cunning, conveniently forgetting her own gossip about coded telegrams. The church bell rang for morning service, its peal a call to normalcy, though the pews buzzed with murmurs of the murders, each teller adding a flourish to the tale. Little Paddocks itself was quiet, its windows unshuttered, but its rooms empty of the life that had once filled them. Philippa Hames, now grappling with her identity as Gödler's heir, had left for Milchester to consult a solicitor, her grey eyes bright with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Julia Simmons, released pending minor charges for her trust fund thefts, had returned to her medical studies, her cool facade cracked but not broken. Mitzi, the volatile cook, remained, her threats to flee England softened by the promise of a raise and the village's newfound respect for her intuition. The house, stripped of Charlotte's presence, seemed to breathe easier, its polished floors and chintz curtains awaiting a new chapter. Craddock's morning began at the police station, where he reviewed the final reports. Charlotte, now in custody in Milchester, had provided a full statement, her voice hollow as she detailed her transformation. After her goiter surgery at Clinique Valmont, she had learned of Letitia's death in a wartime bombing, a loss that left her alone, scarred in spirit if not in body. The Godler will, naming Letitia as heir, offered a lifeline, but only if Charlotte could claim her sister's identity. She had returned to England, her resemblance to Letitia near perfect, and settled into Little Paddocks, rebuilding a life on a lie. Dora Bunner, her old friend, had accepted her as Letitia, her scatterbrained loyalty a shield until memories of Lottie began to surface. Schertz's robbery, Charlotte admitted, was a staged spectacle, his payment drawn from the trust she managed under a false name. She had shot him, grazing her own ear to feign victimhood, ensuring his silence with a bullet to the chest. Dora's poisoning, executed with cyanide slipped into her tea by a hired stranger, was a desperate act when her friend's doubts grew too loud. Patrick, her lover, had rigged the fuse box, believing the plan a harmless ruse to secure the fortune. "He loved me," Charlotte had said, her eyes dull. "He didn't know I'd kill." Craddock, reading the transcript, felt a pang of pity, quickly eclipsed by the cold necessity of justice. Patrick's arrest had been harder, his naval charm crumbling into defiance as he was led away. "I only helped with the lights." He'd shouted, his loyalty to Charlotte a chain he couldn't break. His complicity, though limited, ensured a charge of accessory, and Craddock suspected the courts would be lenient, given his ignorance of the murders. Julia, questioned again, admitted her thefts were driven by ambition, her medical dreams outpacing her scholarship. Charlotte's threats to expose her had bought her silence, but she swore no knowledge of the killings, a claim Craddock believed, her shame too raw to be feigned. Philippa's inheritance, confirmed by Godler's solicitor, was the case's unexpected grace note, as Randall's secret daughter, born to a wartime liaison and raised unaware of her lineage. She stood to claim the fortune that had sparked Charlotte's crimes. Craddock had met her at the station, her quiet strength a contrast to the chaos around her. "I don't know what to do with it," she'd said, her voice soft. "I only wanted a life for my boy." Craddock, touched by her humility, had promised to guide her through the legal maze, a task he now delegated to a trusted colleague. Miss Marple, preparing to leave Chipping Cleghorn, walked to Little Paddocks one last time, her black umbrella tucked under her arm, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. Mitzi greeted her at the door, her usual scowl softened by a grudging respect. "You find the truth, Miss Marple," she said, offering a cup of tea. "Maybe this house not cursed now." Miss Marple smiled, accepting the tea, her eyes roaming the drawing-room where Scherz had fallen. The mantel photograph, Letitia and Charlotte, one throat bandaged, was gone, removed by Craddock as evidence, but its image lingered in her mind, a testament to a deception that had cost 2 lives. She found Philippa in the garden, tending the roses, her blonde hair tied back, her face serene despite the upheaval. "Miss Marple," Philippa said, rising, "I owe you so much. You saw what I couldn't." Miss Marple's hand, gentle on her arm, was reassuring. "You saw enough, my dear. Your pity for her, even when you didn't understand, spoke volumes. They spoke of Philippa's plans to bring her son home, to rebuild a life with the Girdler wealth, to honour the father she'd never known." Miss Marple, listening, felt a quiet pride. Her role not just to unmask evil, but to clear the way for good. Craddock joined them, his hat in hand, his expression a mix of fatigue and relief. "Miss Marple, you're leaving us," he said, his tone almost wistful. "Chipping Cleghorn won't be the same." Miss Marple's chuckle was soft. "Villages endure, Inspector. They bend, but they don't break." She shared a final insight, her voice low. Charlotte's mistake was greed, but also pride. She thought she could rewrite her story, but stories, you see, have a way of writing themselves. Craddock nodded, his admiration unspoken but clear, her words a lens that clarified the case's heart. The village, meanwhile, wove the murders into its lore. At the church, the vicar preached on forgiveness, his sermon a gentle rebuke to the gossip that still flared. Mrs. Harmon, hosting a tea, regaled her guests with Miss Marple's brilliance, embellishing her role as a detective in petticoats. Miss Hinchcliffe, tending her pigs, grunted approval of the outcome, her faith in justice restored. Colonel Easterbrook, polishing his medals, declared the case a lesson in modern depravity, while Laura, painting her nails, sighed for the lost excitement. Mrs. Swettenham, with Edmund in tow, began a novel inspired by the events, her son's, notes now a manuscript in progress. Miss Marple's final stop was the Bluebird Café, where Mrs. Lucas offered a scone on the house. The café, once the scene of Dora's death, hummed with life, its patrons debating Charlotte's motives over cups of tea. Miss Marple, nibbling the scone, listened to their theories. Charlotte as a mastermind, Patrick as a dupe, Julia as a victim. She said little, her smile enigmatic, her thoughts on the human heart, so quick to err, so slow to heal. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple," Mrs. Lucas said, wiping her hands. "How'd you spot her?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I only watch, my dear. People tell their own tales if you let them." At the station, Craddock saw her off, the train to Meddenham Wells puffing steam into the clear sky. The platform was quiet, the village's bustle a distant hum. "You've taught me a thing or two," Craddock said, tipping his hat. "I'll be sharper next time." Miss Marple's laugh was gentle. "You're sharp enough, Inspector. Just keep your eyes on the small things, hands, glances, the way a word catches. That's where the truth hides." She boarded, her knitting bag at her side, her small figure vanishing into the carriage as the whistle blew. Little Paddocks, now in Philippa's care, awaited its new mistress, its rooms to be filled with a child's laughter, its garden to bloom under her quiet hand. The Gazette, silent since the fatal advertisement, ran a sober report, its editor vowing no more pranks. The village green, where children played, bore no trace of the fog or the fear, its grass bright with autumn's last colours. Chipping Cleghorn, like Miss Marple, bent but did not break, its story one of resilience, stitched together by truths hard won. Craddock, driving to Milchester, felt the case's shadow lift, his mind already turning to new challenges. He thought of Charlotte's broken confession, Patrick's shattered loyalty, Julia's humbled pride, Philippa's quiet strength, and Miss Marple, with her needles and her wisdom, a figure as unassuming as the village itself, yet as enduring. He smiled, knowing he'd carry her lessons forward, a detective shaped by an old spinster's clarity. Miss Marple, in her train carriage, opened her knitting, the needles clicking softly as the countryside rolled by. Her thoughts drifted, not to Chipping Cleghorn, now at peace, but to other villages, other houses, where secrets waited to be unravelled. Human nature, she murmured, is the same everywhere. The train rattled on, carrying her home, her work complete but her vigilance eternal, a guardian of truths that hid in plain sight.